Just let me know when I'm good to start.
Yeah, you're good to go. Yeah, so can you hear us all right? And let me just try out the mic. Yeah, can you hear us talk here?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is partly an open discussion, so anytime anyone needs to speak, I'll be handing them the mic. Just speak confidently, loudly, and once again, thank you so much for coming. You may begin, please.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here and see so many of you here on a Saturday night. Thank you so much, Paul, for the invitation. I'm super happy to be here. You're all doing such amazing work in AI, so I'm excited to learn from you as well and from all the incredible work that you're doing. So a little bit about me. My name is Thuy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Vietnam, in Hanoi specifically, the capital, but I've also lived in Geneva, Stockholm, and Ottawa before finding my way to Montreal for university. And I'm a fourth year honors cognitive science student with a minor in international development studies at McGill University. And I'm very passionate about cognitive science, AI ethics, and research. So feel free to ask me about any of these things later on. I'm currently doing research with Professor Blake Richards at Mila, and I'm currently working on multi-agent reinforcement learning to capture indigenous cultural value systems. And I can talk more about this at the end if we have time. And I also took part in the AI for Good Lab program this summer at Mila, where I worked on using AI to address sex disparities in pharmaceuticals. And I'm also continuing that project as part of the RBC Borealis Let's Solve It undergraduate mentorship program, which is aimed at tackling local community challenges. So I'd be happy to talk about any of these if time permits, but as you can see, I'm very passionate about ethical AI innovation, so I'm super happy to be here once again. And as you know, Mina is really cool because it was founded by Yoshua Bengio, who's a giant of the field, but it's also one of the leading deep learning research institutes in the world, and they place a great emphasis on responsible AI and AI ethics. So I've been attending a lot of these talks, reading groups, and just seminars on these topics. So I might have a skewed perspective of how obvious some of these things are. So feel free to stop me at any point if you feel like I'm going too slow or too fast. But today I'll be giving you a brief introduction to ethics by design. And in preparing for this workshop, I was asking myself, okay, there are so many important thought leaders out there like Yoshua Bengio, who's super vocal about these things. And I'm, of course, really grateful about being here and being invited to give this talk. But what value do I actually bring to the table? And what can we bring to the conversation? And I personally would argue that we have a lot to bring and a lot at stakes. We're the next generation of machine learning engineers, scientists, developers, advocates, consumers, voters, policymakers, educators, maybe even parents, and specifically parents of AI natives, so children who will be born into this world full of AI. And we inherit a world impacted by the AI we built as we speak. So I'm part of ENCODE Justice Canada also, the Canadian branch of a global youth-led organization dedicated to advancing ethical AI and increasing awareness of artificial intelligence's societal impacts. And as the name suggests, the idea is that we want to encode justice and safety into the technologies that we build. And when it comes to the future of AI, we're both anxious and enormously optimistic about the technologies that we're building. So we're very much pro innovation for the uses of technology that benefit humanity. Yet we have to be really, really realistic about the necessary safeguards to prevent serious risks and harms. And so, since you're all part of QMIND, you're all passionate about changing the world and using AI and data science to do so, tackling real world problems. So it's important to understand how AI is shaping the world around us, and we'll start by exploring some recent real world examples of AI applications that have sparked controversy or legal challenges to emphasize why we need to. Wait, sorry, did someone say something? I keep hearing like background voices. But feel free to interrupt me if you do have any questions about anything that I'm saying. But yeah, we need to be intentional when designing AI systems. So this first example is Amazon's resume screener. It dates from 2018, but they had computer models that were told to approve applicants based on patterns of resumes submitted to the company over this 10-year period. And most of the resumes were from men, so Amazon's algorithm preferred male candidates to female ones. And so they rejected applicants from women's only universities, and that's obviously a problem. We also have MIT, this study from MIT at the Media Lab and their facial recognition study from 2018. And they found that gender was misidentified a lot of the times when it came to to darker skinned females. And it was also yeah, misidentified for darker skinned males as compared to lighter skinned people. And both of these examples show that bias in the data also leads to important consequences for the AI applications themselves. There's also other cases. So this 8-month pregnant and arrested woman, well, I mean, this woman was arrested after a false facial recognition match, and this was a very recent case. And there's also the New York City's AI chatbot that told businesses to break the law. And so it falsely suggested, for example, that an employer had was it was legal for them to fire someone who complains about sexual harassment, which of course it's not, and it's really an important part of how of company safety to be able to report about these things. But yeah, the chatbot was telling these businesses to break the law in that way. And then we also have recent deepfake porn that targeted, influential figures like Taylor Swift, but also millions of teen girls around the world and in Canada as well. And this raises concerns about the erosion of trust and the authenticity of digital content and blurs the lines between reality and manipulation. And unfortunately, this is the speed and quality of these AI systems are far outpacing the legal system. So what we can do as AI developers and just consumers of AI is just to, rather than relying solely on legislation to keep pace with innovation, it's within our ability to contribute to safe and equitable outcomes by having these discussions and by consuming media in a very intentional way. So why should we care? I'm assuming that if you're here on a Saturday night, then you already care. And, beyond pure virtue and just empathy for the people that are affected, there are legal and economical reasons why you should care now because you might get sued if not, especially the increasing AI regulation around the world. So recently, Air Canada got sued in the same way. So they were found liable for damages after its AI chatbot told one of the customers that it was okay for them to buy a ticket and then get refunded later on. And it was an especially sensitive case because it was because their family member died, and so they wanted to fly to Vancouver to, meet to go to the funeral. And so the company claimed that the chatbot was responsible for its own actions, but the court obviously decided that this was that Air Canada was just still liable for the AI technologies that they put out and what they promised to the customers. And so many of these laws, like Bill C-27 in Canada, are put in place to ensure that there's accountability and that there are legal actions against these misuses. And there's also other acts around the world, like the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act. There's also the Paris Agreement, and a lot more regulation around the world. And recently, Canada also launched this Canadian Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute, and there is a $2.4 billion investment to help researchers and businesses develop and adopt AI responsibly. So there's added incentives for making safe AI. And also at Mila with Joshua Benjo, this is a huge topic of interest. So, you might find yourself working with the Joshua Benjo. But yeah, this is a huge focus right now of Mila, and a lot of researchers are looking into these AI control, AI safety research domains. So we're gonna move on to this quick activity. So if you have your phone with you, you can scan the QR code and just write down what you think good AI is. Because obviously we're all here because we're trying to build ethics into the AI that we build. So just, a short sentence or word or what you think good AI is. And the reason I have this is because it will be impossible for me to give you a one-size-fits-all answer to how to make your project ethical, especially because you're all working on such different projects. So Paul, for example, shared with me the project descriptions from the AI ethics node in QMIND, and I saw that they range from AI education to healthcare settings, and from the interest form, we had, finance, performance prediction in sports, medical, aerospace, psychology domains. So it's all super interesting. I'm really excited to see how the projects all play out. And that's precisely the beauty of AI. It's being integrated into every single aspect of human life. Okay, so I see a lot of you are putting unbiased, which is cool. Accurate, yeah, I see functional, safe, helpful, ethical, informative, and unbiased. Accurate, yeah, close as possible to human response. These are all such great ideas. Okay, solves a specific issue. Yeah, that's really important. Impartial, innovative. Yeah, those are all amazing ideas. So, what I want to start with a brief distinction between AI for good and good AI. Because AI for good is AI with good intentions or with a socially good objective. And obviously, responsible AI doesn't only focus on obviously controversial use cases like technologies that cause harm, weapons designed for destructions, technologies used for unlawful surveillance. And I'm sure you all want to do good in your life. And so when we talk about AI for good, we typically mean that we typically talk about the intention behind it. But here's the question. How do we define good? Because what might be good for in one place may not be elsewhere, and how we define good in our society or community could differ from what's considered good in other places. And it's not as simple as just creating something that we can label good. There are many examples of AI for good applications today. So we can think about AI in education, maybe making education more accessible, or in healthcare, where AI could make healthcare systems more efficient and accessible. But in these contexts, there are also a lot of medical biases that lead to harmful consequences. And even though in these contexts, AI can be labeled as for good, they also have very harmful consequences, like I mentioned. And there's also a very important case of a chatbot that was designed to act as a psychologist's assistant. So it was trained on real conversations between psychologists and patients, but it ended up providing harmful advice, which led to the user actually committing suicide. So this is obviously a good intention that led to something very devastating. Sorry, I'm just letting people into the room. Okay. Okay, so now we know that AI for good is not good AI. And AI can have beneficial intentions, but doesn't mean that the system won't be creating harms as a byproduct, and responsible AI isn't always guaranteed. So some of the stereotypical concerns surrounding how AI can go wrong in pop culture revolve around, killer robots, existential risks of AI, people losing their jobs. But there are very real concerns that are already impacting people and that you can play a role in as a developer. So I looked at some of the responses from the interest form and selected a couple of domains to show that even well-intentioned applications can cause ethical issues. So I saw someone put finance. So a good use could be AI analyzing credit worthiness to provide microloans to underserved populations. But a downside to that would be that it could create increasing wealth gaps by perpetuating biases in loan approvals. And in medicine, there's a lot of cancer detection and just overall image-based diagnostics. But flawed medical image classifiers could misdiagnose patients due to non-representative training data, with which we've mentioned a couple of times now. In the case of wearables, smart watches could help detect, the onset of diseases or like epilepsy and things like that to alert users to potential upcoming dangers and avoid those. But a bad use could be privacy invasion. Privacy invasion by wearables that track and sell user location and health data to third parties. And then in case of warfare, of course, I mean, there's not a lot of good in warfare, to be clear, but we could use AI-assisted disaster response, such as locating survivors in rubble using drones. But a bad one could be facial recognition systems used to suppress and track individuals in author authoritarian regimes. And in education, AI tutors will personalized learning and experience for diverse students in needs, but a bad use could be the lack of diversity in learning opportunities that stifle creativity and critical thinking. And we'll have a case study after this. And then art, I learned recently that there was something called algo rave, which is when people go to these raves and they perform live with AI models, which is kind of cool. And then the bad use, of course, would be if AI generated art was mimicking the styles of living artists without their consent, and there are issues with intellectual property in that. So this is just a very general overview with one example for each, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of potential good use and bad uses in every single AI application. So to recap, AI for good does not necessarily mean responsible AI. And to create AI, good AI, we need to bridge the two. And you want to develop AI for good, but also design it in ways that prevent harms. And good intentions are not enough. So good AI, or by extension, responsible AI, means designing systems to prevent unintended harmful impacts, regardless of the application. So regardless of whether we're in medicine or law, even though it is important to take a case by case approach and have people dedicated to that specific field. So here's a definition of responsible AI from a 2022 publication by Mila in collaboration with the UN Habitat. So it's an approach whereby the life cycle of an AI system must be designed to uphold, if not enhance, a set of foundational values and principles, including the internationally agreed upon human rights framework and sustainable development goals, as well as ethical principles. And so it emphasizes this holistic approach and careful thinking in the design of any AI system, regardless of the field of application or objective. And it's the collection of all choices, implicit or explicit, made in the design of the life cycle of an AI system that can make it irresponsible. So how do you make good AI? That's what you're all here for. So some things to start to think about is, are the means consistent with ethical principles? Does implementation of the system in the real world cause harm? And so this is a schematic view. Don't get scared. I don't want you to look at this in detail, but it's just to show that responsible AI is a complex and evolving field. It's new and it's multidisciplinary, and it requires a lot of different stakeholders. We have the private sector, the civil society, academics, and the public sector also. So, and I'd just like to mention that I'm not an expert in responsible AI. I probably would never call myself an expert in anything unless I were to win a Nobel Prize or something, simply because I genuinely believe that there's always room for improvement and growth. And this sounds really corny, but in the case of AI ethics, it's really important because just like everyone here, I'm always learning, and it's important to recognize that matters related to ethics may always evolve based on the time period, and some things that may be widely accepted now may not be in the future. And so this goes to my next point. So what is even ethics? So it's related to moral philosophy, and morals are tied to our culture and individual values. And these morals change over time. And one really sad and bad example is slavery, which used to be rationalized by racism as a moral practice. But now there's been a a well-deserved cultural shift based on human rights, and slavery is now immoral. So people like to have one set of rules that they can apply to everything all the time, but there are always exceptions and special cases. And what I want you to take out of this workshop is not, prescriptive things of what to do in this scenario and that scenario. It's just to develop a mindset of continuous ethical questioning about the work that you're doing. So tech ethics is not new. Reflections around the intersection between technology, culture, and ethics has been around for a really long time. So this is a picture from 1960s when this research institute, it's Stanford, developed the world's first mobile intelligent robot called Shaky. And so, the responsible tech emergence appeared through this continuation of exchanges, collaborations, and discussions between various fields. So now the responsible tech industry has really expanded, and there's so many different subfields. We have digital rights, data justice, AI tech policy. So yeah, these are all things that you can go to within the responsible AI field. And so another important takeaway is that the pace of AI development warrants urgent attention, and anticipating emergent risks requires a lot of speculation. And this is incredibly difficult because you want to build an AI that performs well and acts safely in many domains with many consequences, but with problems that you as engineers never explicitly envisioned. So it's extremely difficult to anticipate all the risks in the world, and we'll probably never be able to do that. But this is not something to get discouraged by. And there's a common misconception that machines play the central the central decision-making role in AI, but in reality, people design and build these machines and decide how they're used and control every aspect of AI development. So human decisions are embedded throughout the entire life cycle, from collecting the data models and controlling AI deployment. So this means that every decision requires careful evaluation to ensure responsible choices are made from concept to deployment and maintenance. Yeah. So the best that we can do is approach the design of AI systems with ethics in mind. So asking key questions like that I previously mentioned, but I'll go more deeply into it right now. So a bit of an analogy, building ethics is like baking a cake. And you need to take a life cycle approach. So asking ethical questions throughout the design process, like I mentioned. So when baking, you choose ingredients, which is like selecting the data. You follow a recipe, which is like following algorithms. And now you need to ask yourself, who is going to eat the cake? And in the same way, who will be using your AI system? At every step you make decisions, you need to ask, so the person I'm baking for, do they have any allergies? Do they have preferences, cultural concerns? And like for AI, you need to ask, who is this system for? What ethical concerns might they have? Are your ingredients slash the data sourced ethically? Were people harmed in the collection of the data? And you need to be intentional in every decision you make throughout the process, just like you would when making a cake. So yeah, for every stage of the design process, from gathering data to deployment and maintenance, you need to ask these ethical questions. So the AI lifecycle includes framing, design, implementation, deployment, maintenance, and these are five different phases, which are a cycle, and all of them also inform the framing phase. So each phase involves choices and assumptions, and you need to consider these ethical considerations. So framing focuses on problem definition, which lays the foundation for the later phases. Design is more on building the algorithm itself before any coding, and so it builds on the parameters that identified in the framing phase. And then implementation is the more technical one, which we might be more doing, is structured around the AI pipeline. So the issues in the phase are specifically about the algorithm itself, specific technical decisions. And then deployment phase begins once an algorithm is fully developed, and the risks in this phase arise when an algorithm is taken from a controlled and predictable laboratory setting to a real-world environment. And we have, of course, maintenance phase, which is really important, but not if people care about this after it's deployed. So begins after an algorithm has been deployed and concludes when it is retired only. So this phase um, consists of the long-term life of an AI system, including the algorithm functionality and just making sure that it's up to date. So I'm going to go through each of the phase and lay out all of the questions that you need to ask yourselves. So in the first phase, you need to ask yourself, is AI the best tool to tackle this challenge? And we're going to go through this at the end. But it's I understand that at this point you want to hone your computational skills, so it's okay to try to test out things in using AI, but it has a huge environmental cost. So it's an important question to consider when you're setting these project objectives, scope, and intended use. Also, have existing AI systems been applied in a similar context? And if not, maybe there's a reason why. And so, what are the lessons learned? And you can also ask yourself, who are the different stakeholders? So if you're doing an application for healthcare, you need to take into account the actual patient's preferences. Are there AI literacy and human capacity about the chosen problem? So these are all things to think about when you're framing the problem itself. Then the design involves a lot of data creation and selection. And you've probably heard the phrase trash in, trash out. So because algorithms are trained to make decisions by analyzing countless instances of real-world data, they extract patterns and statistical correlations between inputs and outputs that reflect the patterns and the statistical correlations that we see in the real world. So you need to ask yourself, does the data set contain historical data? What are the potential social biases embedded in the data? Does the data collected, oh wait, I have made a mistake here. Is the data collected with meaningful consent? Are there any guidelines for annotation tasks? Are there any data sheets for the data set? So yeah, so you know that algorithms, when they're trained on historical data sets, they adopt the biases of human medical practitioners. I'm using the example of medicine again, because that's personally what I'm more interested in using with AI. But yeah, predictive technology trained to analyze historical data to forecast the future will only replicate the historical inequalities. So this is an important thing to consider. So in the implementation phase, you need to ask yourself what type of privacy preserving method match the context. Is the model geoculturally aligned and can it be adapted to match its geographic and cultural context with fairness and robustness methods? So this is a bit wordy, but for example, a lot of, the the embeddings for ChatGPT and stuff like that are only catered towards English speakers, so it may not well scale to other languages and stuff like that. So you need to keep it in a local context. Okay, and then in the deployment phase, you need to ask yourselves when choosing existing third-party algorithms, has a comprehensive risk assessment been conducted? How can you address the risks of the algorithm? Are domain experts locally available to evaluate the efficiency of the system? What are the responsible AI practices that the AI systems designer can Okay, sorry. I need to rewrite this, but this is all in this one document that is from the UN Habitat, still the same AI in cities one, which I can send afterwards. But how does the algorithm perform, and what are the limitations, and how transparent is this information? So the last phase, the maintenance phase, it's really important to integrate feedback loops. So what type of user feedback does the AI system require? How can users be engaged most effectively? What types of background knowledge are needed for meaningful and reciprocal participation? And how do existing feedback processes affect people's trust in the AI system? So this is a lot to consider, and I understand that, you're not necessarily forced to, consider all of this, and it's hard to pay attention to multiple things at once. But I do believe that one day some of you in this room might become CEOs or world leaders. So it's just really important that you consider all the different phases of your AI system if you're in the position of power and can hire someone whose, sole mission is to help you make these ethical decisions. But in the meantime, you can use self-regulation toolkits, technical frameworks, or look through like external oversights like actual laws and regulations in place in Canada to help guide your decisions. And they help you guide you in making responsible decisions throughout the process. But I understand this is a lot to consider. So we're gonna put this in practice with a case study. So this is Stanford's autism class. I'm just gonna read this out and you can take a picture because I'll go on to the next slide. So over 1 million children under the age of 17 in the US are on the autism spectrum. These children often fail to recognize basic facial emotions, which makes social interactions and developing friendships even more difficult to sustain. Gaining these skills requires intensive behavioral interventions that are often expensive, difficult to assess, and inconsistently administered. The Stanford Wall Lab Research Group has developed a system using machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate facial expression recognition that runs on wearable glasses and delivers real-time social cues. Using Google Glasses sensors, including the camera, head motion tracking, a microphone, and custom-made add-ons such as infrared camera for eye tracking, our software analyzes social interactions of the wearer with other people. Analyzes, sorry. The system then gives social cues in real time, for example, about facial expressions that can be happy, interested, etc., shown on glasses heads-up display, and records social responses to analyze them later in behavioral therapy, including the amount of type of eye contact made. So those of you who are in person, you can talk with the people at your table. And on Zoom, I'll put you in breakout rooms very soon. But I want you to consider these different questions for ethics by design. So is the objective morally acceptable? If no, then you need to stop the project. And you just move on down the line to these questions to see if this is an ethical use case of AI. But yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes. We can say maybe 10 minutes, and we can reconvene, and one person from each table can let me know what they discussed. Just gonna mute myself for now. So we're actually running a little bit low on time, so if you guys can come back in like a few minutes or a few seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're mostly good.
Okay, sounds good. So does anyone want to volunteer and let me know what your team discussed?
Good.
Wait, what are we supposed to be saying? Is there like any specific, or just talk? Yeah.
Like what specifically in those three stages do you think is the problem?
Okay. Um, I got here late, so if I'm missing anything, anyone can add something later, I guess. I guess that like going straight to the first objective, it seems morally acceptable, I think, because the aim is to help these children with like recognizing social cues. I so think we can kind of pass on to the next one. Is that kind of the thing? They're like checkpoints? Okay. And then for the second one, I think like it's pretty consistent with ethical principles in general. That's like very broad though and very vague, but essentially like the ethics of it is kind of trying to be helpful and trying to help people. So it seems that it's consistent with ethical principles. Are they robust and morally acceptable? This is a good checkpoint. I don't know if we can say that the results are robust. Morally acceptable, I would say yes. Robust, not sure, because I think it calls into question the implementation of the system in the real world and if that causes harm. I can elaborate on that quickly if you want. Okay. What I was thinking is that like it calls into question the implementation of the system in the real world and if it creates harm, just because I was thinking about privacy, because this like technology says it records social responses to analyze them later in behavioral therapy. And then keeping in mind that these are children, there is the question of like, then they need consent from their parents to be recorded, right? So first there's like that hoop to jump through, I guess. And then there's like, yeah, privacy concerns, like, and then it's, I guess, another thing to think about would be like, if it is recording people, to analyze it later, and this would need to be explored like logistically. But if it is like, how are you going to get consent to record everyone for tracking the social cues? And then are you able to record these like responses and analyze them later if you can't get consent from all the people who are being recorded? Does that make sense? So in that case, like, I guess that calls into question if the implementation of the system in the real world creates harm, just because then you can't, it's difficult to guarantee that you could get video, audio, and photo consent from everyone who's being recorded with this technology. And then it's like they're children, so then it's like, if they are being recorded, like without consent, that calls into question if it creates harm or not, just vaguely. And then in terms of like, let's see. Another thing that would be called into question is, I think also like the whole point of the technology is to help children with autism or like on the autism spectrum to recognize basic facial emotions to then help them with social interactions and developing like friendships and relationships. But I guess that calls into question like, would this then become like a crutch of sorts for children who are kind of looking for this kind of help? And I'll keep it brief because we should move on.
Thank you so much. That was a great response. Before I comment on that, I guess does anyone want to add any more perspectives? But that was a very complete answer. That was really great. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to like add a little thing to what Jennifer said, which was the part where it's like are results more or no, are the results robust and morally acceptable? With autism, there's like a huge spectrum, right? So like there are people with like, or like, you know, some people who have autism will like, you know, have like light sensitivity or like hearing sensitivity. So then if you're saying like in a crowded place, like in like a mall or like some sort of like public area, and you just have like a bunch of these icons that appear that like, oh, that person's happy, that person's sad, it could become very overwhelming for them, which is I would say like, you know, would be helpful in this case for, you know, like kids with autism. That was the only thing I wanted to add, so.
Well, thank you so much. But yeah, you guys are definitely touching on interesting points, especially with so it's a whole spectrum, right? So in terms of the first question itself, we're also wondering if maybe this is adding a load on these kids by forcing them to conform to, you know, neurotypical standards instead of it's integrating neurodivergent ways into a typical neurotypical approach. But you know, if we consider that perspective, then it's maybe not the most morally acceptable, but I do think there are really good intentions behind this. And then if we go in terms of the means consistent with ethical principles, the first person raised really good points about privacy issues, autonomy, informed consent. Also, are we getting these kids' consent? Are we getting the parents' consent? Are we getting psychologists involved in this? And so there's a lot of different questions also on accessibility. So if this tool really works well, then how accessible would it be? Would it be really expensive? And what could that have in terms of implications for society? And so, yeah, there are a lot of underlying values in this context. So there's the well-being of children, accessibility, autonomy, inclusivity, privacy, conformity, and diversity. So there's a lot of tension that makes us question this initiative, although it is, of course, by good intentions that they're developing this and could be very beneficial to a lot of kids on the autism spectrum disorder. So there's a question of conformity versus diversity. Like I mentioned, it's not clear if children with ASD would actually benefit from said tool or if it's not trying to make them conform to society's norms. And also, even in evaluating what certain emotions means, it is also different in terms of which culture you're part of. And the means of the project, there are privacy concerns. It's not clear if facial recognition is respecting people's privacy, especially if it's just the person wearing it is just, and the other people around them are not aware that they're being recorded. And so also in terms of the outcomes of the model, so diversity, it's not clear if emotion recognition, as I mentioned, is a legitimate science and if models would not be biased in that ways. And the impact of the project as a whole on society could potentially, you know, improve children's well-being, but it could also hinder people's privacy and make neurodivergent children conform to societal norms. So there's a lot of tensions between piracy, autonomy, conformity, and diversity. So these are all things that you should also think about in your own individual projects. But thank you so much for contributing to the discussion. Those are all such great points. And with ethics, it's always about perspectives and the social context in which you're in. And I do agree with all of your responses. Other ways which you can look at AI ethics, for example, there's this Harvard Data Science Review, which has a unified framework of 5 principles. Because what I was trying to make you understand with the previous case is that ethics really depends on what kind of morals or values you're prioritizing. And so there's a lot of different frameworks that exist right now. And so this is another example, the Harvard one, which has these 5 principles, which is beneficence, that you must do good, non-maleficence, don't be evil, autonomy, so you should be able to make decisions without AI, and you should be able to not be subject to decisions made only by AI. Justice, your project should try to fix something, and explicability, you should understand how your model works, and this is to prevent, you know, the black box of AI. And so this is also another different way of approaching these scenarios. This is another decision tree with different questions like, does it do anything good? Does it not do anything bad? Still based on the previous 5 key components of AI ethics. So does it not force somebody to obey its will? Does it fix anything? Do I understand how it got there? And if at any point it's a no, then it's probably not ethical. So it's really about how you view these and what kind of ethical framework you're viewing these scenarios. And another important critical framework that I would like to share is who participates in research. So for those of you who are doing more AI research-based projects, it's important to consider that the majority of research has focused only on Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic patients. So there's the acronym is weird for this. And there's this concept of epistemic injustice, which arises when a person is unfairly treated in their capacity as a knower or epistemic agent. So I come from a cognitive science background, so I'll give you an example based on neuroscience. But in neuroscience, decades of data has historically been biased both in terms of participant selection and in terms of those who actually get to conduct research. So in terms of research opportunities. And so this further constrains the types of questions that can be explored. So it may manifest in the marginalization of people with psychiatric illnesses or neuroatypical cognitive profiles where prejudice against undermine their credibility to give informed consent or fully comprehend the research project. So in the example of people with dementia, the researchers might think that their testimonials are not reliable. So that's one case of epistemic injustice. But that leads to AI systems that fail to adequately account for the diverse range of patient experiences. So questions to ask for your research is what assumptions am I making about underrepresented groups? How is the literature contributing to this? How am I including underrepresented groups in my study population? Does my data analysis approach make assumptions about underrepresented groups? Does the reporting of my results perpetuate this marginalization, or does it perpetuate inaccurate assumptions of these groups? And will individuals from these groups be able to access my outcomes? And are the results generalizable to a diverse population? So there's a lot of conscious and unconscious biases that can significantly distort knowledge and have substantial consequences at both individual and societal levels. There's also this concept of designs from the margin, where the core idea is to center the needs of marginalized communities, these decentered users from the ideation to production. And the key idea or principle is that when designed for the marginalized, then everyone is going to benefit. So we want to move beyond US and EU-centric user models and adopt ethical frameworks that prioritize these marginalized groups. And you need to think globally and avoid assumptions based on dominant cultures or geographical norms and consider a lot of different varied lived experiences, and also to challenge this status quo and advocate for the ethical design practices in your teams, in classrooms, pushing for a more against this purely profit-driven priorities that are so frequent in US and EU-centric regions. So these are all some other resources to check out, which I'll send a version of the slides to Paul afterwards if you want to take a look. But in the meantime, I do want to hear about your projects. So if you could take out your phones again and scan the QR code and tell me about your project. This is anonymous, but you can give as much detail as you want. Just one sentence about your project and the one or multiple ethical issues that might arise that you've come to realize throughout this conversation.
And would it also be possible to ask you about some questions, some ethical issues that might arise from some people's projects, if you're
Yeah,
curious?
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, consent for inclusion, definitely. It's really cool. I'm so far removed from the AI and art domain, so I'm really excited to see what you do with generative AI and music. Okay, yes, a lot of copyright laws. Improving images of people without their consent. Yeah, improve to stalk or find people. Yes, autonomous driving, making decisions when facing an accident. Definitely a lot of issues related to accountability. Um, privacy issues with inform and okay, so it's starting to move pretty quickly, but my best to read. Optimized therapeutic cancer vaccines. yeah, need to be careful to train your model on holistic diversity assets. These are all such great responses. Um, Ensuring that automation processes don't replace jobs. Yeah. Uh, Recognition of underrepresented people. So yeah, you're definitely starting to develop this mindset of ethical questioning, which this is the whole purpose of this workshop. And also after this, feel free to send me a message. If I can't answer it myself, I can put you in touch with the responsible AI experts at Mila who can, give one-on-one feedback on your project. Okay. LLM red teaming, yes, trying to bring out certain behavior, toxicity. Making sure the product is not offensive. Ooh, AI in Marxism. Okay, that's really cool. If AI is conscious, are they obligated rights? Will they take over white collar jobs? Okay. So AI and consciousness is really interesting because in cognitive science, which is what I'm studying, we talk about consciousness a lot. And I mean, I maybe I shouldn't start this because otherwise I'll go on in this tangent. But it's been debated since a really long time with Turing and his Turing machine, and so the problem of whether AI will eventually be conscious or not is still up for debate. But anyways, issues could detect lights from elsewhere and potentially harm the objects, beings that are not inside a robot. Yes. Track an enemy robot in robotics competition based on the color of its lights. Okay, yeah, that's really cool. So I see that people stopped typing, so I'll just move on to the next slide. Is AI always the right solution? So I touched on this a little bit at the start. And AI can benefit society in many ways, but given the energy needed to support the computing behind AI, these benefits come at a very high environmental price. And many other technologies have tangible goals. For example, humans wanted to fly, so they built airplanes. But the goals of AI are often broader and realistic, like creating intelligence or surpassing human intelligence. And intelligence is loosely defined as something smarter than humans. So this reflects sort of a shift in how we view progress or how we've viewed progress with AI. So we've embraced this idea that technology can solve every problem, and as a result, we often leap to creating solutions before we've even clearly identified the problems. And I really think when we're building AI, when we're training on so much data and just harming the environment in the process, then we should really be doing it to solve a real world problem and have this evaluation of the potential benefits against the potential harms. So what I'm trying to say is that AI innovation has often lacked a clear purpose or practical application. So we need to ask fundamental questions of a given technology, whether it's truly used for a beneficial purpose and who benefits from it. And so, of course, right now, as I touch on this, you're just trying to hone your computational skills, machine learning skills, which is really cool, and I encourage you to do that. But when you think professionally about what you want to do long term, then it's important to think about whether this will have an overall positive impact on the planet. And so, in terms of environmental costs, it's also important to consider who should build the tech. And so, you should prioritize as much as you can local champions, local efforts, and local resources. So, as I mentioned earlier, many tokenizers in NLP were designed with English in mind, so it might not work for other languages. And leveraging context-specific knowledge to create solutions will be better because they're better tailored to local needs. So we face an opportunity to design AI that accelerates human inspiration, creativity, and promotes equity in the world. So I want you to be part of this culture shift, to just speak up, deconstruct, question the tech that you build, just to work towards this more equitable world. Because as I mentioned, innovation is always going to outpace legislation. So our decisions today will shape the future of AI for decades. And this work that we do today is so crucial. And some of you may become leaders. And so this might be some of the most important work that we will do in our lifetimes. So always ask yourself, who is included on the design team? Who is excluded? Why is the problem you want to solve an issue? What is the root cause? Is there a privacy risk for users, targets of the AI system? And is there an environmental cost to the solution? There's many different ways to approach an ethical problem, and I really think we need a case-by-case approach involving many different stakeholders. So not just AI developers, but also ethicists, political scientists who can make the laws, and philosophers who can think about consciousness. So I really think this takes a team effort, and just you being here today is already such a huge step. We need to have more discussions around the limitations of AI, while still being very hopeful about the amazing things that we can do with it. So that was just my little takeaway. The last few slides were just about my personal project on multi-agent reinforcement learning, but I see that we're out of time, which is, perfect. So if you want to leave, you're free to leave. I also need to go to a dinner very soon, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you have at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Can we just end with a quick round of applause for Tweet?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It has taken a very long time to make, and we appreciate, of course, all of you for coming here on a Saturday night. And anyone have any questions on this off? I have a question. Go ahead. Might take a bit.
So one thing you talked about at the beginning with in-code justice was kind of pushing like these conversations and trying to implement ethical practices because legislation can't keep up with innovation. But do you think that's enough in terms of, striving for ethical practices in AI?
So I couldn't hear super well. So you're wondering if it's enough to just have these discussions or to raise awareness?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So right now, what we're doing with Encode Justice, we're starting to have a more of an AI literacy campaign. So, and starting December, we're going to different schools and universities to give actually more workshops on what AI is and what it can do. And I think it's important to build the next generation of users and consumers or developers to be more mindful about this, because clearly the older generation will always have these incentives in place like capitalism and stuff like that, and there's also an AI arms race right now where, every country is trying to compete to have the best model. So they're just breaking things, pushing things, and just not being mindful about anything. But we're trying to have the next generation be mindful of these things and just at least, well, actually in the US, they're pushing against like for more legislations and laws, etc. In Canada, it's a bit harder to do this since we have like provinces, but yeah, I do think starting with a conversation is the first very important step.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I'll make this quick because I know we are running out of time. I got here a little late, so I didn't really hear you like introduce, I guess, your work. Could you just give like a vague little, like a short kind of, I guess, insight into the work that you're doing that you mentioned?
Yeah, so at the start, I kind of mentioned multiple things, but I guess the way I got introduced to Paul was because I'm part of Encode Justice Canada, and it's a global youth, well, it's a Canadian branch of a global youth-led movement surrounding AI literacy and AI ethics. And I'm also working at Mila, just trying to build more human values into reinforcement learning agents and teaching them reciprocity and sharing resources and stuff like that. But my background is primarily just I'm driven by this real commitment towards ethical innovation, and I've done that through some of my other projects using AI to address like disparities in pharmaceuticals. And I'm honestly really new to the AI field. I only really started this summer as part of the AI for Good Lab program. And I come from a more of a cognitive science background, and cognitive science is the intersection of neuroscience, AI, philosophy, linguistics, and why am I forgetting? And psychology. So we have a very holistic view and understanding of these certain issues, and I really enjoy just engaging in discussions around AI. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. If I wanted to like maybe contact you to kind of like discuss about your background, just because I have a background in pharmacology, how would I do that?
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Well, I guess I'll send Paul all of my contact information, but the main ways to contact me, you can use LinkedIn or email or Instagram, whatever. I'll send all three to Paul afterwards.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you so much for being
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your questions and your participation.
Anything else? All right, we're free to go then. Yeah. Have a great rest of your night. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
That's
for
it.
having me.
Thank you. Cheers.